Ryan Calloway had $4.2 million in his bank account the morning he proposed, and every single dollar of it had been quietly, patiently, deliberately targeted before he ever heard the name Vanessa Hartley. This is not a story about a man who ignored red flags. He wasn't naive. He wasn't careless. He was a 29-year-old who built something real from nothing, fell in love the way honest people do completely, and got hunted for it by a woman coached by the person who was supposed to love her unconditionally, her own mother. But here's the thing about plans built on deception. They almost always have a leak. And in this case, that leak had brown eyes, a nursing school acceptance letter pinned to her bedroom wall, and a conscience she couldn't silence no matter how hard her family pressured her to. Her name was Chloe, and she changed everything. Ryan grew up in Decatur, Georgia, not the nice part, the part where you either figure out how to get out or you don't. His father drove delivery trucks. His mother cleaned houses 3 days a week and worked the register at a Kroger the other 2. They were the kind of parents who didn't talk about dreams much, not because they didn't have them, but because they understood that in their tax bracket, dreams were a luxury you couldn't afford to keep indulging. Ryan understood that by the time he was 12. Which is why, by 16, he was already teaching himself to code on a second-hand laptop his school counselor helped him get through a grant. By 22, he was out of Georgia Tech with a computer science degree and a business partner named Marcus Webb who had exactly the same amount of money as him, close to none, and exactly the same hunger. ClearPay was a payment reconciliation app they built for small businesses. Simple concept, clean execution. They spent 2 years living on ramen and investor rejection letters before a mid-sized fintech firm in Chicago noticed them. The acquisition closed when Ryan was 27. He walked away with $4. $2 million after taxes. Marcus cleared $1.8 million. Neither of them had ever seen a number that size with their own name attached to it. Marcus bought a house in Sandy Springs and started a real estate company. Ryan invested conservatively, moved into a condo in Buckhead, and tried, quietly, to figure out who he was when he wasn't grinding. That turned out to be harder than building the company. He was smart, driven, and if you asked Marcus, who never sugar-coated anything, completely unprepared for the social world that came with that level of money. He didn't know the rooms. He didn't know the games. He didn't know that some people treat relationships as transactions, that some smiles are rehearsed, and that certain families, drowning in debt they're too proud to admit, spend a lot of time scanning the horizon for someone like him. He was, as Marcus would later put it, the cleanest target in Buckhead. He just didn't know it yet. The night Ryan met Vanessa Hartley was in October at a charity gala for a pediatric cancer foundation at the St. Regis in Buckhead. His financial advisor had pushed him to attend, something about optics, visibility, building a philanthropic profile. Ryan went reluctantly, in a navy suit he'd bought 2 days before because he'd never needed one that nice in his life. Vanessa was already there when he arrived. She was 27, and she was precisely the kind of woman who knew how to stand in a room. Not loud, not trying too hard, just there, present in a way that drew attention without demanding it. She was in a floor-length burgundy dress, talking to a city councilman's wife, laughing at exactly the right moment, touching the woman's arm with practiced warmth. Ryan noticed her from across the room, which is exactly what she'd been counting on. Because Vanessa Hartley had been at that gala for one reason, and it had nothing to do with pediatric cancer. 3 weeks earlier, her mother Diana had clipped an article from the Atlanta Business Chronicle. The headline read, "ClearPay co-founders, the Decatur kids who just cashed out at 27. There was a photo. Ryan was in it. Diana had circled his name in red pen, looked at his face for a long moment, and called Vanessa into the kitchen. "His name is Ryan Calloway," Diana said, sliding the article across the marble counter. "He'll be at the St. Regis Gala next month. Your father's old colleague confirmed it." Vanessa picked up the article, looked at the photo, looked at her mother. "How do you know he's single?" Diana had smiled the way people smile when the answer is obvious. "He's 27, just became a multimillionaire and grew up poor. Men like that don't prioritize relationships when they're building, which means right now he's alone, he's newly wealthy, and he doesn't know how to navigate this world yet." She paused, which makes him perfect. This was not the first time Diana Hartley had run a play like this. It was just the most ambitious. What followed was 14 months of the most calculated romance Ryan Calloway had ever experienced, and because he had nothing to compare it to, he experienced it as genuine. Vanessa was good, better than good. She was exceptional. She'd spent a week before the gala studying him, his LinkedIn, his limited social media, a few interviews he'd given post-acquisition. She learned that he was from a working-class family, so she never performed wealth or status around him. She played grounded. She learned that he valued honesty, so she presented herself as refreshingly straightforward. She learned that he was passionate about financial literacy in underserved communities, so she conveniently mentioned volunteering at a youth financial literacy nonprofit 2 dates in. She never overdid it. Diana had coached her on that specifically. "Don't mirror him too perfectly," Diana had said. "Men with his instincts will feel something is off. Give him a few things to push back on. Let him feel like he's discovering you." Vanessa gave him just enough friction to feel like a real person. Their first conversation at the gala lasted 40 minutes. Ryan asked for her number. She gave it to him, then waited 3 days before responding to his text, not because she wasn't interested, but because Diana told her not to be too available. The first date was dinner at a low-key restaurant in Inman Park, not the flashiest place he could have chosen. He picked it because he didn't want to show off. She told him afterward that it was exactly the kind of place she liked. He felt seen. He wasn't. By the 3rd month, they were exclusive. By the 6th, he'd introduced her to Marcus. Marcus shook her hand, watched her eyes, and felt something he couldn't name but didn't like. Afterward, over beers at Ryan's condo, he tried to articulate it. "She's too smooth," Marcus said. "What does that mean?" "It means every answer she gives is the right answer. Every story she tells lands perfectly. Real people are messy, bro. She's not messy." Ryan shook his head. "You're overthinking it. I'm telling you what I see." "She's just a composed person, Marcus. Not everyone leads with their trauma on the 3rd date." Marcus let it go. He'd said his piece. He dropped it, but he didn't forget it. Ryan met the family at month 8. The Hartley family home was in Alpharetta, a 5-bedroom house in a gated community that still had its original mortgage, a second mortgage taken out in 2019, and a 3rd line of credit that Diana had quietly opened without telling Gerald. The house looked like prosperity. Like most of what Diana Hartley constructed, the surface was impeccable and the foundation was rotting. Gerald Hartley was a contractor who had built a solid small business through his 40s, and then, through a combination of bad partnerships and Diana's spending habits, watched it collapse. He was 56 now, soft-spoken, slower in the eyes than a man his age should be, and fond of bourbon that he poured before anyone else came downstairs. He shook Ryan's hand firmly and meant it. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had long ago abdicated his moral authority to his wife, and now lived in the quiet aftermath of that surrender. Diana Hartley was another category entirely. She was 54, impeccably dressed in their own home, the way people are when appearances are armor. She had a smile that was warm in temperature and calculated in deployment. She asked Ryan thoughtful questions about his background, his work, his vision for the future, and she was good at it. She laughed at the right moments, softened at the right details, and by the end of the dinner had made Ryan feel like he'd been welcomed into a family that understood him. "I like her," Ryan told Vanessa on the drive home. "Your mom, she's sharp." Vanessa smiled out the window. "She really liked you too." What Vanessa didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that the moment Ryan's taillights disappeared down the driveway, Diana had turned from the front door, looked at her daughter, and said, "He's everything I thought." Now don't get soft. There was one more person at that dinner. Chloe Hartley was 23, 4 years younger than Vanessa, and in many ways the most foreign creature to have emerged from the Hartley household. Where Vanessa had been shaped by Diana's hands like clay, Chloe had somehow resisted the process. She was quieter, less practiced, less polished, and when Ryan sat down at that dining table, she barely made eye contact with him for the first hour. Not out of coldness. Out of guilt. She'd known about the plan since the beginning. She hadn't found out the way you'd imagine overheard whispering, a discovered text chain. She'd found out because Diana had told her directly 3 weeks before the gala and had expected her to be on board. "Your sister is going to meet someone," Diana had said, sitting across from Chloe at the same kitchen counter. "And when she does, you need to support her. That means not asking uncomfortable questions. It means not having any conversations with this man that go beyond polite small talk. And it means understanding that what she's doing is for this family. Chloe had stared at her mother. You're setting Vanessa up to what, trap some guy? I'm ensuring this family's security, Diana said, with the flatness of someone who had already decided the conversation was over. Your sister understands what's at stake. I need you to as well. That's wrong, Mom. Wrong doesn't pay the second mortgage, Chloe. She'd gone silent. She was 23. She didn't have the language yet or the leverage to fight Diana Hartley head-on. So she went quiet, kept her distance, and carried the weight of it alone for the next 14 months, watching Ryan Calloway at family dinners, watching him be kind and real and completely unguarded, watching him fall in love with a woman who was performing it. And each time she went home and felt something tighten in her chest that she could only describe as suffocation. Ryan proposed in May, 2 Mays after they met. He did it privately, just the two of them, on the rooftop of the Buckhead condo at sunset, with a ring he'd spent 6 weeks choosing. Not the most expensive ring the jeweler had. The one he thought she would love, because that's the kind of man he was. Vanessa cried. Diana, when she heard, opened a bottle of Veuve she'd been saving for exactly this moment. Gerald poured another bourbon and said nothing. Chloe sat in her bedroom with the door closed and her nursing school textbooks open in front of her, not reading a word on any page. She stared at the wall for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and looked at Ryan's contact. She had his number from a family group chat Diana had added everyone to. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put the phone down, not yet, but almost. The wedding was set for the following spring. It was going to be big. Diana had designed it, down to the floral arrangements, insisting on a ballroom at the Four Seasons in Midtown. The budget was $140,000. Ryan was paying for it. He'd agreed without hesitation because he wanted Vanessa to have the day she'd dreamed of, and because he had the money, and because that's what you do when you love someone. Marcus was the best man. He'd accepted the role with loyalty and said nothing more about his doubts, because Ryan was happy and Marcus understood that his job now was to support, not undermine. But 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus called Ryan at 11 p.m. "You need to come over," he said, no explanation. Just those 5 words in a tone Ryan had never heard from him. Ryan drove to Marcus's house in Sandy Springs and found him at the kitchen table with a laptop open and a look on his face that Ryan would later describe as like he'd seen a car accident in slow motion and couldn't warn anyone in time. Marcus had been doing what Marcus always did when something felt wrong. He'd started asking questions. Not to Ryan, to people, to the kind of Atlanta real estate and business network he'd built since the acquisition. And 3 days before that phone call, someone in that network, a mortgage broker who handled the Alpharetta area, had told him something in passing at a networking lunch. Diana Hartley's house was 6 months behind on the 3rd mortgage. That alone could mean anything. But it led Marcus to pull at a few more threads. The Hartley family had $334,000 in combined debt. Gerald's business had dissolved in 2021. Vanessa had credit card debt she'd never mentioned, $48,000 across 4 cards. Her lifestyle influencer income barely covered her own rent before she'd effectively moved into Ryan's condo after the engagement. "It doesn't prove anything," Marcus said carefully. "But Ryan, when did she first tell you about this debt?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "She said she had some student loans." Marcus looked at him. "That's it." Ryan didn't answer. He drove home at 1 a.m. and sat in his car in the parking garage for 30 minutes. He was not a stupid man. He had always known, somewhere below the surface, that the information Vanessa had chosen to share with him was curated. He had told himself that everyone keeps some things private early in a relationship. He had told himself that he hadn't been perfectly transparent either. But $48,000 in credit card debt, a family in foreclosure risk, not one word of it in 14 months. He went upstairs. Vanessa was asleep. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and felt the first real crack form, not in his love, not yet, but in his certainty. In the story he'd told himself about who they were to each other. He didn't sleep that night. He might never have said anything. He might have filed the information away, resolved to bring it up carefully, talked himself out of confronting the pattern. He'd invested 2 years of his life and every honest feeling he had into this relationship. Walking away from that is not simple. no matter what the numbers say. But Chloe called him the next morning. She called from a number he didn't recognize, a prepaid phone she'd bought specifically for this, because she knew her family tracked her regular phone. It was a Thursday, 9:17 a.m. He was in the parking lot of a coffee shop in Buckhead, about to go inside. "Ryan." Her voice was quiet, controlled, like someone who had rehearsed the first word but wasn't sure about anything that came after. He recognized her immediately. "Chloe." "This isn't your number." "No, I bought a different phone." A pause. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to everything before you say anything, because once I start I need to finish." "Okay." He sat in his car with the engine running and said yes. She talked for 22 minutes. She told him everything. The newspaper article, the kitchen counter, Diana's plan, the coaching Vanessa had received before the gala, the studied approach, the calibrated self-presentation, the deliberate performance. She told him about the family's debt, about how she'd been told to stay quiet and play along, about the 14 months she'd spent watching him be deceived, about the engagement and the $140,000 wedding budget, and the way Diana had said phase 2 to Vanessa after Ryan proposed, an offhand phrase Chloe had heard through a cracked door, casual in its calculation. She told him about the prenup. Diana, it turned out, had spent considerable energy coaching Vanessa on how to frame a conversation about a prenuptial agreement, specifically, how to make Ryan feel that suggesting one was an insult to the love between them. The goal was to get married without one. There were conversations about his estate, Chloe said, about what Vanessa would be entitled to in a divorce after a certain number of years. My mother has run through the math. She talks about it like a timeline, like a project. Ryan said nothing for a very long time after that. "Ryan." Chloe's voice broke slightly, the composure she'd held for 22 minutes fraying at the edges. "I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. I've wanted to for a long time, and I was scared of what my mother would do, but I couldn't let you walk down that aisle without knowing. I couldn't." He breathed out slowly. "Are you safe?" he asked. "Right now, are you physically safe?" She was surprised by the question. "Yes, I'm at school. She doesn't know I called you." "Okay." Another long pause. "Thank you, Chloe." He hung up and sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. Then he called Marcus. "You were right," he said. "From the very beginning." He didn't go in hot. He went in prepared. He spent 2 days saying nothing, acting normal, processing everything Chloe had told him and cross-referencing it with everything he already knew. He called a family law attorney he'd been referred to through his financial advisor, not because he thought he'd need one, but because he needed to understand his legal position before he moved. He had the attorney pull Vanessa's public financial records. Everything Chloe had described was there and then some. He also called Marcus, who came over on the second night with 2 coffees and sat with him until 3 a.m. while Ryan talked through 2 years of a relationship, not looking for permission to end it, but processing the grief of what it actually was. "She might have real feelings in there somewhere," Marcus said carefully. "I'm not saying she's a robot." "It doesn't matter," Ryan said. "The foundation is a lie. You can't build anything real on that." Marcus nodded. He knew he was right. On Saturday morning, 9 days before he was scheduled to stand at the altar in the Four Seasons, Ryan asked Vanessa to sit down with him in the living room. He did not accuse. He did not rage. He placed the documents from the attorney on the coffee table, and he told her in a measured and completely controlled voice exactly what he knew. The debt, the timeline, the gala, the plan, the coaching, the phrase phase 2. He watched her face. For the first 4 seconds, she looked for the exit. Then, because she was smart and composed and had been prepared for contingencies by her mother, she tried to redirect. She started crying. Not the genuine tears of someone caught, the structured, practiced tears of someone escalating to an emotional defense. She said he was being paranoid. She said Marcus had poisoned him against her. She reached for his hand and said his name like a plea. He moved his hand away. "Who told you?" she said. The tears stopped. He didn't answer. "Who told you?" Her voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone, the practiced warmth that had taken 14 months to manufacture, gone in under 30 seconds. "The engagement is over," he said. He held out his hand. "I need the ring." She looked at his hand for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read, part fury, part disbelief, part something almost like relief, as if some part of her was tired too. She pulled the ring off. She placed it in his palm, and then she left. He heard her on the phone in the hallway before the elevator arrived, voice shaking, and the one word he caught clearly through the closed door was, "Mom." What followed in the Hartley household over the next 72 hours was the kind of implosion that occurs when a carefully constructed house of cards is built on the same foundation as the real relationships inside it. Diana found out within the hour that Ryan had called it off. And within 2 hours, she had, through the logic of a person who has never once accepted responsibility for the consequences of their actions, decided that the cause of this catastrophe was Chloe. She didn't know for certain, but she knew her older daughter well enough to know that Vanessa hadn't slipped, which left Chloe. The confrontation between Diana and Chloe happened Sunday morning in the kitchen where the plan had started. Gerald was at the table, a coffee going cold beside him, watching. Diana did not yell. She was too composed for yelling. She was colder than that, the kind of cold that gets into walls. She told Chloe that she had destroyed the family, that she had taken something that could have secured all of them, the debt, the mortgage, the collapsed business, and she had thrown it away out of some naive notion of right and wrong. She said that Chloe was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. She said that no one in that house had eaten well without sacrifice, and Chloe had just thrown that sacrifice in the garbage. Chloe stood across from her mother, and for the first time in her 23 years did not look away. "I told him the truth," she said. "That's all I did. You betrayed your sister. Vanessa was using him, Mom. You built her to use him. That's not a plan. That's not family strategy. That's fraud." The word landed like something dropped from a height. Diana looked at her youngest daughter and said, very quietly, "You are not welcome in this house until you understand what you've done." Chloe picked up her bag from the chair by the door. She had packed it that morning because she had known this was coming, and walked out. Gerald watched his wife's face after the door closed. He watched the silence in the kitchen. He thought about the bourbon in the cabinet above the refrigerator. Then he thought about Chloe's face when she said the word fraud. And for the first time in more years than he could count, he felt something other than numbness. "She's right, Diana," he said. His wife looked at him with an expression that suggested she had not heard him correctly. "She's right," he said again. "She was always right, and so was the boy." He stood up from the table, put his coffee cup in the sink, and walked to the back porch. He didn't reach for the bourbon. He just stood outside in the cold morning air and breathed. That was the beginning for Gerald of a very long reckoning. Vanessa did not go quietly. She cycled through grief, rage, and strategy in roughly 24-hour intervals. First, she called Ryan 12 times in one evening. He didn't answer any of them. Then she sent a 3-page text that began as an apology and ended as a threat, suggesting that she would contact his investors and business contacts with a version of events that cast him as emotionally abusive. He forwarded it to his attorney without responding. She tried to reach Marcus. She called 3 times, texted once. He read the texts, didn't reply, and sent Ryan screenshots. She told her friends, the ones who knew her socially, the influencer-adjacent crowd, that Ryan had left her for no reason, that he had commitment issues, that she was devastated. She posted a carefully worded Instagram story, The Color of Grief, without naming him, that generated 40,000 views and 600 sympathetic comments. Ryan saw it. He felt something, not anger, not even contempt. Just a quiet, exhausted sadness that this was still the performance. Even now, even after everything, it faded. He went back to work, back to his condo, back to the shape of his real life. The larger fallout came at the Four Seasons 3 weeks later. The venue had to be canceled. The deposits were not fully recoverable. Of the $140,000 budgeted, Ryan had already advanced $62,000 in vendor deposits. He made no move to recover it from the Hartley family. His attorney advised him he had grounds to, but he declined. He wrote it off. He was done. Diana somehow found a way to frame this as additional evidence of Ryan's cruelty. She told people, family, friends, church acquaintances, anyone who would listen, that he had exploited Vanessa emotionally and then abandoned her. A few people believed it. Most people, seeing the specific nature of the charges against no one in particular and the lack of any actual detail, found the story thin. Vanessa's influencer following noticed the vagueness too. Comments shifted from sympathy to curiosity to skepticism. Her engagement dropped. Brand partnerships that had been in early negotiation quietly went silent. It was nothing catastrophic, but it was a beginning. Gerald, in the months that followed, started attending Al-Anon meetings, not because he had stopped drinking, but because a man he met at the hardware store told him about them, and something in him said yes. He began, slowly and imperfectly, separating himself from Diana's version of reality. They did not divorce, not then, possibly not ever, but something in the geometry of their marriage shifted irrevocably. Diana found herself increasingly unable to pull him into her narrative. He had developed, late in life, the simple and devastating capacity to say, "I don't think that's right," and mean it. Vanessa moved back into the Alpharetta house. The energy there was not what it had been. She was 27, her fiancé was gone, her Instagram metrics were declining, and her mother's steady certainty, which had always been the structure she orbited around, had developed visible cracks. For the first time, she began to look at the architecture of her own life and understand, imperfectly and incompletely, that she had built nothing herself. That realization did not make her a better person overnight. It made her quiet for a while. Quiet and suspended, like someone standing at the edge of a diving board, not ready to jump, not able to back down. Chloe had moved into a studio apartment in Decatur, 2 miles from her nursing school, which she was now attending full-time on a partial scholarship and a loan she'd taken out herself. She worked 12 hours a week at a hospital front desk. She ate mostly rice and chicken and the occasional Chick-fil-A because she was on a budget that required a spreadsheet and the absence of any illusion. She had not spoken to her mother in 6 months. She called her father once a month, brief calls, carefully navigated. He always sounded slightly more like himself each time, which was simultaneously encouraging and heartbreaking. She did not reach out to Ryan. She had done what she did because it was right, not to get anything from it, not gratitude, not a relationship, not anything. She had drawn a clean line under it and moved forward with the particular determination of someone who has finally stopped living in other people's stories. Ryan found her. He'd been sitting with Chloe's phone call for 6 months, not obsessively, not like a man building towards something, but the way you sit with an act of genuine courage when you recognize it. He had thought about it more times than he could count. He had thought about the 22 minutes she spent on that prepaid phone, the way her voice had broken at the end. The first thing he'd asked her, "Are you safe?" and how she had paused before answering, surprised that someone thought to ask. Marcus was the one who finally said it out loud, in the blunt way that was his particular gift. "You think about her all the time, and you're pretending you don't because you feel guilty," Marcus said. They were at a Falcons game halftime, both holding beers. Neither of them was really drinking. Ryan didn't answer. "She's not Vanessa," Marcus said. "She's the person who got you out. I know who she is. So what are you waiting for?" Ryan looked at the field for a while. "She had a terrible 6 months because of what she did. Her family is broken. I don't want to walk into her life right now looking like what? Like she gets a prize for telling the truth." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's not what it would look like, and you know that." He texted her in November, not a romantic text, not charged, just simple. "It's Ryan. I've been thinking about how you're doing. I know things with your family have been hard. If you ever want coffee or anything, I mean it genuinely, no obligation." She read it 3 times. She did not respond for 2 days, not because she was playing any game, but because she genuinely needed to think about what she wanted. Then she texted back. "Coffee sounds good. There's a place near my school in Decatur I like." Their first meeting was a Tuesday morning at a small coffee shop on East College Avenue in Decatur. She got there first. He was 4 minutes late because he'd second-guessed parking twice. When he walked in, she looked up from her phone, and this is the detail he would tell people later, the detail that cracked through everything else. She looked nervous. Genuinely nervous, in the way people are when something matters to them and they don't know how to pretend otherwise. No performance, no practiced composure. Just a 23-year-old woman with nursing school textbooks in her bag and a small blot of coffee on the cuff of her sweater that she clearly hadn't noticed. He sat down. "Your cuff," he said. She looked down. "Oh my God." She grabbed a napkin. "I literally just did that." He laughed, actually laughed the way he hadn't in a while. "Thank you," he said, not about the cuff. She looked at him directly. "You already thanked me." "I know, I'm saying it again." She looked back down at the coffee stain. "You don't owe me anything, Ryan. I want you to know that. I'm not here because I know," he said. "That's why I texted." A pause. "Is that a good reason?" she asked. "I think so, yeah." They stayed for 3 hours. He paid. She fought him on it briefly and then let it go. They talked about her nursing school. She was good at it, genuinely, the kind of good that happens when someone has finally found something real. They talked about what he'd been doing. He was working on a new project, early stage, more excited about it than he'd been about anything since ClearPay. They talked about her father carefully, and he listened without offering anything prescriptive. They did not talk about Vanessa, not that day. The second coffee became a monthly thing, then bi-weekly. Then, somewhere around the fourth or fifth meeting, which neither of them was quite tracking anymore, it stopped being coffee and started being dinner, and then it stopped being counted at all. Marcus, who had watched Ryan's face the first time Ryan mentioned Chloe's name in a non-contextual sentence, just dropped it into conversation the way you drop in a name that lives in your head, had simply nodded and said nothing. Some things you let land. It was slow. Unhurried, neither of them pulled it forward faster than felt right. He met her at her apartment for the first time in February. Not a date, technically. She'd had a genuinely bad week and needed to talk, and he brought grocery bags because she'd mentioned offhand that she hadn't had time to cook. He made pasta. She sat on the counter and talked at him while he cooked, and he kept getting the timing wrong because he was paying more attention to her than to the water. At some point in all of it, they both understood without announcement that this was what it was. He told her about the night he'd sat in the parking garage after Marcus's call, about the 30 minutes he'd spent in the car, about the specific moment, sitting in his condo at 2 a.m. while Vanessa slept, when he had looked at the ceiling and felt something in him separate from the story he'd been living in. She told him about the 14 months of watching him across dinner tables, about the weight of knowing, about calling him from that prepaid phone with her hands shaking, not knowing if he would believe her, not knowing if she was doing the right thing or just blowing up her family for nothing. "It wasn't nothing," he said. "I know that now," she said. "Did you know it then?" She was quiet for a moment. "I knew it was right. I didn't know if it would matter." He looked at her for a long time. "It was the most important phone call of my life." She didn't say anything, but she reached over and took his hand, and he held it, and that was enough. Ryan proposed to Chloe on a Tuesday, not a Saturday chosen for symbolism, not a rooftop engineered for the photo. A Tuesday evening in the Decatur apartment she'd finally upgraded to a one-bedroom, 2 months before she finished her nursing degree, while they were cleaning up after dinner, and she was lecturing him about proper dishwasher loading technique, which she had very specific opinions about. He stopped in the middle of the kitchen and looked at her. She looked back. "What?" He pulled the box from his jacket pocket, which he'd been carrying for 3 weeks waiting for a moment that felt right, and had finally decided that right was just this, the undramatized, unstyled truth of who they were together. She covered her mouth with both hands. "I'm not asking because of what you did," he said. "I'm asking because of who you are. You're the most honest person I've ever met. You were honest when it cost you everything. I want that. I want you. The rest of it," he gestured vaguely at the world, "none of it matters." She was crying, genuinely crying, the kind that doesn't look good in photos but is the realest thing in the world. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on. She looked at it for a long moment. "The dishwasher thing still stands," she said. He laughed so hard he had to sit down on the kitchen floor. Marcus was his best man again. He wore the same suit, which he claimed was intentional, a private joke between the two of them. At the rehearsal dinner, he pulled Ryan aside. "I told you," he said. "You told me she was smooth," Ryan said. "That was Vanessa. And before that, I told you something else." Ryan thought about it. "You told me real people are messy." Marcus pointed at him, and Ryan looked across the room at Chloe, who was talking to a nursing school friend, laughing at something that had apparently spilled on someone, genuinely unself-conscious, wearing a sweater she'd borrowed from Ryan because the restaurant was cold, her hair slightly less than perfect. "And you were right," he said. Marcus picked up his drink. "I'm always right. You're not always right. I'm right about the things that matter." Ryan looked at him. He thought about the 11 p.m. phone call. He thought about the Sandy Springs kitchen table. He thought about a beer at a Falcons game and a sentence that had cut through everything he'd been telling himself. "Yeah," he said. "You are. The wedding was small, 40 people. A restored barn venue outside of Athens, Georgia, string lights, a caterer who came from Decatur. Live music from a friend who played acoustic guitar. Chloe's nursing school classmates in the front row. Marcus in the back, crying, which he denied immediately and consistently for the next 3 years. Gerald Hartley was there. He had asked Chloe 6 months before whether she wanted him to come, and he asked it with the humility of someone who understood he wasn't entitled to the answer. She had said yes because she knew who her father was trying to become, and because she loved him, and because she had not confused what her mother had done with what they had done. Diana was not invited. Vanessa was not invited. They had not spoken to Chloe in 2 years. Diana's silence was fury wearing the costume of dignity. Vanessa's silence was harder to read, whether it was shame or simply the quiet of a woman finally stopped in a direction that had only ever been someone else's. Neither was present the moment Chloe walked down the aisle in a simple ivory dress with no train, a small bouquet, and the expression of someone who has survived something and come out on the other side not hardened but clarified. Ryan watched her come toward him. He thought about the parking garage, the 2 a.m. ceiling, the prepaid phone, and 22 minutes and a voice barely holding together at the end. He thought about all the things that have to go wrong for something right to happen. She reached him, took his hands. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. The efficient began. Outside, the Georgia afternoon was warm and bright and entirely indifferent to the specific miracle occurring inside that barn, the way real life always is. Large events happening in ordinary weather under ordinary skies, quietly changing everything. The only person who called Ryan the next day besides his parents was Marcus. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked. Ryan was sitting on the porch of the cottage they'd rented for the weekend, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up over the Georgia hills. "Like I'm living my actual life," he said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. "That's exactly what it should feel like. Some people enter your life wearing the face of what you asked for. Some people enter your life wearing the face of what you needed. The rarest ones are the people who told you the truth at the highest possible cost. And if you're lucky enough to find one, you hold on.